In this class we're going to talk about action learning. In fact, the material in this class is fairly straightforward. It's quite straightforward. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on each of the slides. I will go through the slides fairly fast to enable a reasonable time for the whole exercise. You'll see from the bottom right hand corner of the slide that in fact there are 107 slides in this class. Don't let that put you off. As I said, I'm going to go pretty fast through it, and a lot of the slides are very straightforward, so there's no need to engage in very deep thought in this context. That's not belittling the topic. It's a very important way of learning, and educationalists subscribe to it to a large extent across many institutions and in many contexts. It is important, but it is straightforward to understand, I think. Let's start and get into it, and we'll see what we mean. Action learning, it's a method of personal and managerial or organizational development. It's a way of developing the person or the management team, and it does it by practical means. A way of learning from our actions and what happens to us and around us by taking time to question, understand and reflect, so that we gain insight and consider how to act in the future. In other words, this is based on observation and experience. We look at what's happening around us, we look at our own experiences, and we try to learn from these, and we learn how to respond in similar circumstances in the future. So it's learning by experience, it's learning by doing, learning by our actions. It's a continuous process of learning and also of reflection, looking back on what we've learned and making sure we understood it. And it's supported by colleagues who do the same thing. Most of us do it even without thinking. When we have an experience, we reflect on it later, we think back, we rationalize it, we analyze it, and it helps to form our opinions about what should be done in similar circumstances in the future. The intention with action learning is getting things done. So what is action learning? Well, it's an approach to the development of people in organizations which takes the task as the vehicle for learning. So the task, whatever the job is the vehicle for learning. At a university and a college, the vehicle for learning might be books, or the tutor who gives classes, perhaps lectures or seminars or tutorials. That's the vehicle for learning. But the vehicle for learning in action learning is the actual task itself. Given the job and having completed the job, we think back, how did we do it? Where did we go wrong? Why did it go wrong? What did we get right? Could we improve upon that? So it's reflection, looking back on the job, learning from the experience, and the job itself is the learning vehicle. That's what is teaching us. It's based on the premise that there is no learning without action, and no sober or deliberate action without learning. So action learning as an approach puts learning and action together. It sees the two as conjoined. They go together, which means that this type of learning it involves doing. Reading a book is quite passive. The book gives us knowledge. We read the book. The knowledge comes off the page, if you like, and into our heads. With action learning, we do something. We actively do it, and we learn from that experience. It's one approach to learning. It doesn't mean it's superior to others or inferior to others. It is an approach which may be useful in certain contexts and not so in others. But for completeness, I think we need to understand what action learning is. Now, it allows the individual to learn from experience. Well, that's a good thing. We all learn from our experiences. Good experiences and bad experiences. We think back, we reflect on it, we get to understand it, and in similar circumstances in the future we have a good idea of how to behave. And we share our experiences with others. We tell them what happened to us, what happened, and what we did, what went right, what went wrong, and make them aware of the situation. And sometimes when we get it wrong, our colleagues may challenge us and also offer support. So it involves others, perhaps. Some activity which we engaged in which went wrong or went right or whatever, we had some experiences from it, and we share those experiences with colleagues. They may offer different opinions, and through discussion we learn more about the whole event. And we take the challenge that the event gave us and what our colleagues said, and we try to, next time round, to incorporate their thoughts to try and improve on our own performance. And we review with the colleagues the actions taken and the lessons that we have learned. So we go back to them again, and we've implemented their suggestions, and we've tried it out, and we had varying experiences, good and bad again, and we go back to the colleagues and we talk about it again to see if there's some more refinement, some more ideas which will again help us to solve the problem or to deal with the issue. It's active. This whole approach is based on the work of Reg Revens back in 1998, but really it started a bit before then. And as I said, it's quite a popular approach in practical situations. Now, the things to avoid in action learning set, in an action learning set, which by the word set we mean here a group of people working on a particular issue or a particular problem could constitute the set. So what we should avoid is imposing our values and opinions on others. We shouldn't be too forceful. We should make suggestions, but don't bully our values and opinions. Other people's values and opinions are important, and their experiences should be incorporated. We're looking for a fuller picture, not just looking for one person's views. We're looking for a whole set of views. We shouldn't give too much advice. We shouldn't monopolize the situation by talking and giving advice and all the time interfering with the way people are thinking and the way they're emerging in terms of the problem and what they're thinking about. We shouldn't try to lead it for the sake of leading it. The whole idea is to give advice, but give it in small amounts, and give it when it's relevant. Give it when it makes a positive contribution, not just for its own sake. And try to avoid being judgmental. Try to avoid criticizing colleagues who come up with ideas and the ideas may seem inappropriate. Don't be too judgmental. Ask why, what's the logic, and how does it fit together? Because they may see something that perhaps we don't. They may see an issue that we're not aware of. So rather than jumping in and criticizing them, it would be better to ask, what's the basis of the thought? What have they got in mind, and how will it help the situation? Don't criticize or trivialize another person's contribution. They are perhaps doing their best. They're trying to help. So criticizing them unnecessarily or making fun of them is inappropriate. It's not right. They have a contribution to make. It's a valid contribution. If it's not a solution, or if it's not contributing towards the solution, at least they have tried. And that should be encouraged. Involvement is a good thing. Now, the benefits of action learning, well, it leads to increased confidence because having experienced the situation, having learned from the situation, having reflected on it, there's increased confidence that if this arises in the future, we are more equipped to deal with it. And there's a better self-awareness. We know our own limitations. We know what we can do and what we can't do. And we approach situations from a broader and more political perspective than in the past. We're able to incorporate other people's opinions and seek advice and organize ideas and get a much fuller picture by involving others and by reflecting on the situation ourselves. So it's much more dynamic almost. It's action-based. I keep coming back to the word, but there is no other word for it. It's more proactive than reactive in problem solving and decision making. It's going forward and doing it. It's not responding to the situation. It's trying to deal with the situation up front. It's not allowing something to arise and then trying to deal with it. It's trying to get it right first time, and get it right first time by involving the opinions of others, by discussing it, having plans, thinking about it, going through various scenarios, dealing with what-if situations. What if I do this? If that arises, what will I do then? So it's much more proactive than reactive. It's more reflective than emotional in tense situations. When a situation is very pressing, it leads to a more reflective approach to the situation, a more thoughtful approach. More thoughtful because it's dealing with the situation from a perspective of reflection based on previous experiences, based on, if you like, lifelong learning from different situations over a long period of time, and from previous discussions with colleagues. So it's not emotional, it's not panic. When the situation is tense, there is no need to panic. And the people who engage in this are good at listening. They want to hear the opinions of others. They want to hear what happened in the past in similar circumstances, so that they're able to incorporate best practice into how they move forward. They're not going to start to improvise based on nothing, based on ill thought out ideas. They're going to try and take in the experiences of others, situations in the past, reflect on the situations, and, as I said earlier, build up scenarios and try to deal with scenarios and have plans ready for as many eventualities as possible. The people who engage in this are capable of moving on quickly and effectively. Their own careers are quite dynamic. Their own personalities are quite dynamic. They are problem solvers. They have rich experiences, and they're able to bring those experiences to bear in a wide variety of situations, generally speaking. So they tend to achieve goals fast. I say faster, perhaps faster than people who are engaged in more academic type thinking. The academics tend to want to have more fundamental solutions, to consult the books and consult the reasoning and consult the theories and what happened in the past. Now that's excellent, But sometimes in business, there isn't a time for that. The problem is now. The production system has just broken down. A solution has to be found now, today, this minute. The company cannot afford the luxury of sitting back and thinking about it in a rarefied academic setting. It needs a solution now. And it needs people capable of dealing with the situation here and now. So the idea is to achieve goals faster. It tries to stimulate others by giving example of problem solving and also by involving others in situations and asking their opinions. There's much more of a team effort, and each member of the team is sparking off the other members of the team and trying to get more out of each other. Now let's look at the principles of action learning. Generally, adults learn best when they are involved in their own learning about a current life situation. It's argued that when we have experience of a situation, we learn more from it than if we were to deal with it in the abstract, if we just write it down on paper and look at the problem on paper. When we're actually confronted by the situation in practice, it's argued we learn more. And also, if we voluntarily choose a learning experience, we tend to learn more readily because we're interested. If you're interested in a situation, we learn more from it. We engage the situation more fully. So we learn more if we are voluntarily involved. If we're forced to be involved, we begrudgingly learn, which is not full learning. Now, learning happens at 3 levels. First of all, we learn about ourselves, which is most important. We know our own limitations, our abilities. We know what we need to improve, and we know what we can do and what we can't do. We learn about the issue being tackled as well. We learn about the particular problem that we're facing. And about the process of learning. We learn about the process of learning. We learn about how to learn. In other words, when a situation arises, we engage the situation, we try to solve the problem, and we're learning from that. So we're learning about how to learn. We're learning about how to fix the problem and also to take away the experiences that we can apply in the future. So we're learning about learning. Now, the principles of adult learning, according to this, well, if you like, warmth and light. In other words, it's support. The warmth is the support. If we have support in learning, we learn more. We feel it's a more secure environment. We are not criticized for making arbitrary comments or not relevant comments. We feel it's a supportive environment. Light, because we're being challenged, but we're being challenged constructively and helpfully. Now, these will lead to more effective learning. We should have listening, and listening, the power of listening should be emphasized within this framework, because it's through listening, effective listening, that we learn. It's not just listening to the words, but trying to understand the context of what's been said, the words itself, the meaning of the words, and the power of the words. And it should be within some sort of context, some sort of learning context. And when we've learned, we should be able to reflect on this. We should be able to look back and try to understand what was meant, so that we have something we can apply in future. We have the experience of learning, which we can then take with us into the next challenging situation and try and solve the problem using the techniques that we've just listened to and reflected upon. Of course, we can question what's been said. If we don't understand it, we question it. And with the questioning, we should get feedback. We should also give feedback on the presentation as to whether it was effective or not. Did we learn first time, or did we have to work very hard to try and understand what was being said because it was unnecessarily obscure? So feedback is also important. Now let's talk about learning. Well, learning must equal to or be greater than the rate of change. If it's not, it's going to get out of date. Now, obviously this only applies to certain types of learning, say learning in business, learning with particular technologies or particular processes. So we must learn about these at a rate that's greater than the rate of change. Otherwise, we become obsolete, we become redundant, we become passé, we become part of the past. Our skills are not updated. So if you like, learning must be greater than or equal to the rate of change of whatever the circumstances we find ourselves in. Now, what happens during an action learning set? Well, we have time, we have presenter's role, and we have supporter's role. So we have three aspects to consider in the context of action learning. First of all, at the beginning, the presenters are describing, and the supporters are observing and listening. So at the beginning of the learning set, it's describing the situation, describing the circumstances, describing the background, describing the issue. And the supporters are observing it, are looking at it, and listening to what's been said. In the middle, there's more exploration, more questioning, listening and thinking. The presenters are exploring the whole situation. The presenters are questioning what happened and how it could be improved, or what the situation was, or what was needed. And they're also listening. They're listening because it's action learning, so they're involving the supporters. And they're listening to what the supporters are saying, what the other people of the set are saying. And they're thinking about this and trying to refine their thinking, refine their ideas. The supporters are asking, what if? What if that happened? And what would happen if this happened? So the what if situations. And they're challenging. They're challenging what was said. Would this not be a better way of doing it? Could we not do it that way? Why did you do it this way? So there are many questions coming forward of that nature. And then at the end, the presenter is exploring the future actions, exploring what may happen in the future, exploring what's learned from the whole exercise. What can the people present, what can they take away? What did they learn from the whole exercise? Hopefully it was useful. If it was useful, they've gone away improved because they have all participated in trying to find a solution. And the supporters, through questioning and challenging and reflecting back, they're offering ideas, they're thinking about the situation, and it could be even at the end, when the set is broken up, that there will still be feedback from those involved in it, who will at much later dates contact the other members of the set and say, I've been thinking about what happened then, I've got a new idea, this is what I would now suggest we do in similar circumstances. So this reflection does not end at a particular time. It's open to interpretation, analysis, consideration, long into the future. So we have three areas. We have three, if you like, time periods or areas of consideration: beginning, the middle, and the end, which is not surprising. Now, the five main elements of action learning. Well, the individual voluntarily joins the group. If it's voluntarily, it's much better. If they're forced into a group, there's not so much learning. They're reluctant, they're resistant. Voluntary membership is much more enthusiastic. 5 or 6 people read regularly. There's no hard and fast rule here, but if the group is too big, it's unmanageable. If it's too small, it's not going to work effectively. So 5 or 6 would be probably about right. And then take an issue or task, and each person brings what they want to work on. What's their issue? So you might have 5 or 6 issues which will need prioritizing, and there'll have to be some sort of consensus and agreement between the members of the group that these are the issues and this is what we'll work on and this is what we'll think about. And it could be worked on one at a time, or the group may have all of the issues and go back at the end of the session and make notes on each one and think about each one and come up with ideas, so that at the next meeting there's a fuller discussion of each of the topics, which could lead on to even further work. And the processes are, if you like, this is the challenge, to try and get a solution to problems, to get a solution to issues through more active means, through discussion, listening, feedback, reflection. And the group is supportive. Everyone's trying to solve the problems. They're all contributing and all working to make contributions that will help to solve the problems. A facilitator helps the situation by trying to pull out ideas, by getting the members of the group to talk openly, and to facilitate the ideas within the group, write the ideas down so that the group can see what was said, what's the essence of the point. They can make contributions about it, support it, or refine the idea, or gently reject the idea. I say gently because it's important to take the feelings of the person who made the contribution into account, but try to reorientate the discussion perhaps away from a particular contribution that's not seen as broadly effective. So the facilitator has an important function in action learning to try and bring out what the group are thinking. Now, there are differences in the approaches to learning. There's traditional learning, which we're all aware of, what happens in libraries and in classrooms and in lecture theatres. And we have action learning. So traditional learning looks at historic case studies, looks at what happened in the past. Action learning is looking at real case studies, real situations here and now. Traditional learning tends to be individual, whereas action is group. Traditional is learning about others, whereas action is learning about oneself and learning about others. So it's different. Traditional is studying other organizations, while action is studying own organization, studying the organization in which they find themselves. So it's not looking to other organizations, it's not looking in the abstract, it's looking at their own organization where they are engaged at the moment. Traditional is planning learning, and action is planning and doing. It's planning the solution and doing it. Traditional is input based. It's the tutor makes a contribution and the student writes it down. It's input. It's coming from the tutor to the student. It's input. Action learning is output. The group come up with ideas and they try to implement the ideas. So it's based on output. Traditional is looking at the past, whereas action is looking at the present and the future. Traditional is, there's a low risk because it's all been tested and argued and refined by academics and by great thinkers in the area over many years perhaps. Action learning is high risk. Even though the group come up with an idea to solve a problem, it doesn't mean it's going to work. It's based on the idea of maybe 5 or 6 people. And they may not be entirely confident about the outcome. Traditional learning is passive. The tutor makes the point, the student writes it down. It's passive. The student can't do very much about the point. The point is based on the thinking of some great person perhaps in the past. Some great mathematician or some great scientist or some social scientist or some historian or whatever. It's passive. Whereas action learning is doing. It's active. Traditional learning is about theories, whereas action learning is about practical application. Now let's turn to the action learning equation, as it's called. First of all, we have programmed knowledge, expert knowledge, knowledge in books, what we do because that's the way it has always been done. So it's programmed knowledge. It's what we have acquired through learning. We have picked it up from study at school and at college and so on, and we have expert opinion, and we have learnt this. This is our stock of knowledge. And we also learn from questioning, looking at previous experience and questioning what happened and was it the right decision and how did it work. And learning is the result of combining the two of these. So the program knowledge plus the questioning is what we get in terms of learning. Now, problem presenters should prepare for meetings, so those who are the presenters should prepare for the meetings adequately and make sure that the environment is conducive for discussion, it's pleasant, and that the room is laid out in a situation where it's conducive for involvement. Be clear what they want to achieve in their airspace, what they will do to ensure this and what they will ask of the set. So it's important that they're clear about what's going to happen, what they expect. So they must have some sort of focus to control the group down to dealing with issues, and so that the discussions don't become too general and lose focus and hence are not relevant and no solution comes out. That would lead to frustration and would lead to the end of the activity. So there should be a structure, a time structure that the presenters have organized. Tell the set what they want and point out what isn't helpful. So at the right at the start, explain to the set what the purpose of the meeting is. What are they there to try and do? They're there to try and discuss an issue, fix something, fix a problem, and implement the solution. And try to be as helpful as possible and work as a team, work constructively to try and do this. What's not helpful is anecdotal comments or criticisms of each other, destructive criticisms, personality clashes. These are not helpful. So the presenter should point out at the beginning what's required. And the set members should be interested in listening and attending. They should be there because they want to be there, and they should be interested in listening. They should want to listen to what's happening, and they should ask helpful questions. Questions that probe the issue, concentrate and focus in on the issue under discussion, and ask appropriate questions. They shouldn't just interrupt. It's not a question of getting their voice heard. Their voice should only be heard if it's constructive, if it's adding to the solution. So being clear about what they're about to say, that's important. Making sure that the question they're about to ask or the point they're about to make is relevant. So it should be helpful to the presenter. And they should convey interest and empathy. They should relate to the topic. They should be there because they want to be there. They're there voluntarily, after all. So they provide information if they've got it, and they provide it openly. And they're supportive, trying to offer insights and ideas and contributing towards the whole process, contributing openly and honestly, but also challenging in a constructive way, asking, would that really work? Is that really the right way to go about things? So a lot of this is based on the Cobb learning cycle, which is also dealt with in separate videos. But we have an experience, stage 1. We review the experience at stage 2. And having reviewed it, we conclude from the experience. We learn from the experience. And then we reflect on this, and we feed back into the following experience. So all the time we're learning from our experiences and feeding back what we've learned. So we become much more efficient at dealing with the problem. If problems arise, we have a stock of knowledge based on experience that we're able to draw upon. I said earlier that there should be a facilitator for the group. The group should be facilitated. There should be one person who's there to help the group, to draw out solutions and comments and points. And I'll go very quickly through some of the type of questions that the facilitator may want to have off by rote. The facilitator may want to use to try and further comment and get deeper into situations. I'll go through these quite quickly. For example, can we stop for a moment and check how we're doing? In other words, when the discussion is perhaps very intense and there's a lot of contribution coming through, can we just stop for a moment and make sure that, see how we're doing, see if we're still relevant, if we're still on target here, if we're still addressing the focus of our discussion. Then you could ask, the facilitator could ask, how do you feel about what is going on? Are we sure that we're addressing the situation here? Are we making progress? How do you feel about this? And when someone makes a comment, you could feel, well, how helpful was that comment? Did it advance us? Did it help to clarify a point? And ask for contributions about the comment. Would it be better to turn comments into questions as opposed to making them comments? Sometimes if they're turned into questions, there's less criticism, and the group will be more supportive because they're trying to answer the question. But through answering the question, they're engaging in some sort of analysis of the problem, some sort of situation analysis. They are trying to solve the problem that's been addressed. And when a comment is made or a question, the facilitator may say, well, what questions does that raise? Because a question may trigger off many other questions. So are they relevant? Is it necessary to go through all of those questions, or was the first question itself irrelevant? Which question was most helpful and why? Which question advanced the discussion most? And why did it advance the discussion? What was about that question? And the facilitator could say, well, why has everyone ignored this question? Or why has everyone ignored that statement? Why don't we look at that statement? Why don't we look at the statement that was made earlier? Because now it seems relevant, because the discussion has moved in a way that makes it relevant. So why has everyone ignored this? Why don't we go back and look at this point that was made earlier? And bearing in mind you're dealing with humans, the facilitator may say, well, everyone seems a little tired, so should we take a break for a few moments, have a coffee and relax for a few seconds and come back to it. Perhaps in having a break, people move away from the intensity of the discussion, reflect in even those few minutes, and come back refreshed and ready to make a more detailed and a more active contribution. Always make sure that the ground rules are being followed. What's the focus of the conversation? The conversation or the issues or the discussion is dealing with solving some problem. It's action learning. And all the members of the group are learning from each other and all trying to contribute towards the solution of some issue. And the facilitator should ask, what are we trying to do here? What is the nature of the issue? Are we all clear about it? And what have we learned so far? And pose questions like, how can we help to solve this situation? How can we help to clarify further the situation? How can we help to correct what has gone wrong? How can we move on? And ask for the involvement of the group in solving that question. How can we move on from where we are now? What's the next step? Can anyone suggest the next step? And how can we make the set more effective? How can we improve the way we're doing things? How can we improve the way we're structured at the moment? Can we look at us as a group trying to solve this practical issue and learn from each other? Is there any way we can improve our own situation here? How can we make this a better experience for us all and learn more as a consequence? And don't be afraid to ask questions like, what does that mean? When somebody says something, what does it mean? What's the suggestion here? How does that fit with what we're discussing? What does it mean? Try to bring out the inner thinking. It's perhaps not just an off-the-cuff remark. It may be there is meaning in what was said, and it's necessary to probe deeper to find exactly what was meant. And ask, is that helpful? At the very end, was it helpful? Was everything helpful? Or if in the course of the discussion, if there was an impasse, everyone was stuck, the facilitator may make some suggestion and then say, is this helpful? Is it helpful if we say the following? Is it helpful if we take this point and go back to this point and now try to work on this one? Is that helpful? Again, it's involving the group. Some people say, yes, it's a good idea, let's go back to that one. And some people say, no, it's not. We've already discussed it. It didn't take us anywhere. Let's move on with this point. But at least people are talking again, and the discussion is up and running again. So the facilitator has re-engaged the group. Now, closing a session. Well, a member of the set takes notes throughout which will be revised at the next session and kept securely in the meantime. So it's important that the information that flowed during the exercise was captured. If no one wants to take the notes, perhaps it could be videoed. Although that may distort the discussion. It may lead to bias in the sense that people are reticent to contribute because there's a video on. Perhaps just taking a few notes might be the best way. If one person doesn't want to do it, the members of the group could be asked to just keep notes themselves, and all the notes are put together and perhaps looked at the next meeting. Very briefly, perhaps even the facilitator could go across the various notes and try to get a master set of notes out of the various individual notes that were kept. An action plan is drawn up for each presenter, which they will take away and act upon before the next session. It's important at the end of the session that each member of the group should know what's required of them for the next session, and that everyone else knows what each member of the group are going to do and what their contribution will be, so that in the interim period they're able to do some research into the area, to check material, talk to other people who had experiences of issues and problems that are relevant in the context of what's been dealt with in this particular action learning set, and be able to feed this back at the next session. So action learning is one approach to learning. It's important in many areas. For example, in business, where situations have to be solved quickly, it's important to have managers who are capable of thinking quickly and who have experience and are able to reflect upon the experience from the past and bring it to bear on current situations, and teams who are able to work together, make contributions and know each other and support each other in this type of learning. So it's an important one. It varies radically with the more traditional method, as I said earlier. So that's what I want to say about action learning, and I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.